Today we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Kaf Zayin. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start, we finished the Mishnah yesterday about all items that one can use to make an Eruv, and we said other than water and salt. Now we're going to get off on that. We will get back later to the other parts of the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara starts off on the first line of today's daf. Ein lemedim min haklalot. You can't learn from generalizations, or you can't learn, it's not a clear-cut learning from a generalization. Meaning, if they give a general principle, there's always exceptions to the rule. We know that to be the case always, right? There's always exceptions to the rule whenever you have a rule. Even in a case where there's exceptions listed, just because there's exceptions listed doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't more exceptions. So basically, it means two things. It means if there's a general principle, there is likely to be exceptions. And even when they say there's exceptions to the rule, there are also likely more exceptions than those listed. You can see why they're discussing this because our Mishnah starts off in you can make an Eruv with anything, which is the general principle, other than, and there they make an exception to the rule, water and salt. So Rabbi Yochanan makes the following statement, and then the Gemara is going to say, where did he make his statement? Did it have to do with our Mishnah or maybe somewhere else? Based on the fact that Rabbi Yochanan said, even in a place where there's an exception listed, meaning that what he's really saying is you can't learn from general principles, and even in a case where there's general rules makes it sound like he wasn't talking about a case where there was an exception to the rule. He was talking about a case where there weren't. Take a general rule and say, you can't really learn from this general rule. Then he adds, and even if, which wasn't referring to what he was referring to. So that's what the Gemara says. Because he said, even in a place where there's an exception listed, from there one can infer to lav hachakai. That he wasn't standing there, he wasn't in our Mishnah when he made that statement. This reminds us of the first Mishnah in Bracha when it said, Tana, where was the Tana, hechakai, when he says me'ematai? Where was he coming from when he said me'ematai, korin et shma? You know, where did he even start from that he said me'ematai, korin et shma ba'aravim? So here also they're saying, where was Rabbi Yochanan referring to when he made this statement? So now they say Hatamka. He must have been standing in a Mishnah in Kiddushin, very famous Mishnah. Kol mitzvot aseh shazman grama, anashim chayavim v'nashim pturot. Every time-bound commandment, men are obligated, women are exempt. V'shalo azman grama, and if it's not time-bound, echad nashim v'echad anashim chayavim. Both men and women are obligated. Uklalahu, and it's a general principle. De kol mitzvot aseh shazman grama, nashim pturot. So now they question, now the Gemara questions. It's a klalahu. This is a general principle that every mitzvah aseh shazman grama nashim are exempt. And now they're going to list a whole bunch that women are not exempt. Hare matzah, simcha, v'hakel. Ti mitzvah aseh shazman gramahu v'nashim chayavot. So first they're going to question, every time by mitzvah nashim women are exempt, what about the following famous three that women are obligated in? Matzah, women have to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. And this is learned, right? The first night is obligatory. The other days are not. Where did they learn that from? So Rashi quotes in the middle of Dibor Matchil Simcha. He quotes, it says, Lo tochal alav chametz, right? You can't eat chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot, and instead 7 days you'll eat matzah. Kol sheyeshno babal tochal matzah, yeshno b'kumechol matzah. If you're included in the negative, then you're included in the positive. So because they can't eat chametz, they also have to eat matzah. That's why women are obligated in matzah. Second, simcha. Simcha is beregel on the holidays. We have to be happy. Where do they get that? Because the pasuk says, look at Rashi, v'samachta ata uveitecha. You and your family. So that includes women. Then Hakel. Hakel, it says explicitly in the Torah, once every 7 years, they gather to hear the Torah on Chag Sukkot. At the end of the Shemitah year, they get together and it says there, Ha'anashim v'hanashim v'hataf. It says men, women, and children all have to gather to hear the reading of the Torah. So there you have, right, they read part of the Torah, not the whole Torah. Anyway, there you have that here are three exceptions to the rule. So it must be that Rabbi Yochanan was there. Next, excuse me. Next line. Now they're going to question the other principle. What about all other positive commandments that are not time-bound? Nashim are always obligated. Women are. What about? I'll give you a few time-bound mitzvot that women are not obligated. Here's the very famous one. Hare Talmud Torah. Learning Torah, women are not obligated. Okay, now, There's a lot of exceptions to this rule. In fact, there was just an article that came out that Rav Malamed said that women can become dayanot and rabbaniot, bi'ikaron. There's no issue, halachic issue with it. And he talks about the fact that people say women aren't obligated. And he says, well, they're not. They are obligated to learn things to understand the Torah better. There is a basic obligation to learn, even though they might not be obligated to learn Talmud Torah all the time. And it's an interesting article. It just came out. So anyway, it's how you define exactly that women are not obligated. And again, even if one's not obligated, it doesn't mean one can't learn. And this is learned out from V'limadatem et b'nechem. You should teach your sons, and they darshan sons and not daughters. And if you're not obligated to teach your daughters, then it must be women on their own are not obligated to teach themselves. And therefore, here, so again, the ikaron, the base halacha is that women don't have the same obligation as men in learning Torah, but it doesn't really mean that they're outside the whole world of learning Torah, as we're doing right now. We obviously think it's valuable and important, and could be seen as there's in different time periods, it might have been different when women weren't educated at all. Anyway, a lot more to be said on that topic, but we'll move on. Piria urivia, having children, is obligatory on the man, and that's because Rashi says, Piria urivia, dechtiv peru revu umelua ta'aretz v'kivshuha, and conquer the land. Say, ish darko lichbosh ve'en isha darka lichbosh. It's generally, lichbosh sounds like to conquer in war. That's generally men do that and not women, and therefore they're also not obligated in peru revu. It's an obligation on the man. Obviously, it takes two to tango, but they're technical from an obligatory stand. The men are obligated, the women are not. And the third one, pidyon ben. And this is because it says tifdeh, and because of that, they darshan tifdeh. We'll learn all of this when we get to Kiddushin. That's really where the sugya is. It says tifdeh, and they learn here. It says tifdeh. I think it says tifdeh. 1 second. There's more to it than that. I forget exactly how they get it from the words, but they say it's whoever is obligated. I think it's padot tifdeh. I think that's why, because it says a double. Whoever's obligated to be redeemed is also obligated to redeem. And women, since they aren't redeemed because they're not b'cholim, firstborn, this is for the firstborn son, pidyon ben. Therefore, women are also not obligated to do the pidyon ben for their sons. Okay, so those are all the mitzvah aseh shelo azman grama. These are not time-bound, and yet nashim are exempt, right? Pidyon ben is supposed to be on a certain day, but you can always do it later. And Torah is all the time, and Priya Rivya is also any time. So what do we say? Ela Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan derives from here. Ein l'medim min haklalot. And by the way, some people take this as an example of, people always try to say, why are women exempt from time-bound mitzvot? And they say, oh, their time isn't their own. They're obligated to their husbands or their children. All different explanations are given. But some people claim that this is a proof, because there's so many exceptions to the rule, that it was just a way of categorizing them. They had a list of ones that they knew women were exempt from. And some people say, oh, so they put it into a category. They said, let's try to come up with a common denominator between all these things, where obviously there's exceptions to the rule because it's not really a rule. And because of that, they came up with this categorization, but it doesn't apply across the board because it's not necessarily 100% accurate. It's not the reason why is not because they're time bound. It's just something that many of the either exemptions or non-exemptions can fall into those categories, but it's not necessarily that that's the reason. So it's just something to think about. Okay, now we're going to move on. Amar Abaye v'itema Rabbi Yirmiyah af ana nami tanina. We also have proof for what Rabbi Yochanan said, that there's always exceptions to the rule. How so? Here we have the following source. Od klal echad amru. There's another rule they said, and now we're moving into the zav. Let's get into issues of the zav and his tuma. Remember, a zav has tuma midras, which means things he steps on or sits on become an avatuma. It's a special type of tuma where it has a very high level tuma. Normally, something that the zav himself is an avatuma. Usually, he would only create a rishon by touching something or coming in contact. Here, even if he doesn't even touch it, but if he sits on it, meaning he's sitting with even a separation between him and the item, but if he puts pressure on it, then it will become tamei av hatuma. So now, what does he say? We also learn the following. There's a klal they said, kol shenisa al gabe azav. If a zav carries something on a tray. Normally we talk about tumat masa, which is I'm carrying something and it's tamei. It's on the tray. I move something that's tamei. I become tamei. Here it's the opposite, where the zav carries something, and by moving it, let's say it's on a tray, he can pass tuma onto that item. That's called el yono shel zav. although some people say this is tumat hesed. I don't want to get into all the details here about the different machlokot about it. So that's tameh. But kol zav nisa alav tahor. But if the zav is carried by something, like let's say someone puts the zav on a chair, but there's a separation between him and the chair, or he's on a mattress and there's something in between him and the mattress. Okay, those aren't good examples. We'll see why in a minute. It would have to be something that's not normally used for sitting on. If it's something that's not normally used for sitting on and he's carried on it, then it will be tahor. But chutz min hara'oi lemishkav u'moshav, if it's an item that's specifically designated for sitting or lying on, like a bed or mattress, a chair, then it will become tameh. But if not, then it doesn't fall into the category chumat midrasas only, things that are normally used for sitting on or lying on. And ha'adam. So these are exceptions to the rule. If hazav nisa alav, then it's tahor. Other than hara'oi lemishkav u'moshav, if he's carried on something that's ra'oi lemishkav u'moshav, as I said, it will be impure. And if it's an adam that carries him, then also he will get the adam impure. No, sorry, not that he will become impure. The item he's on becomes impure, or the person who's carrying him becomes impure. But if it's an object that's not normally used for sitting, that moves, that he's carried on, it will not become impure. So there you have an exception to the rule. So now the Gemara says, Betu Leika, here's Abai wants to prove what Rabbi Yochanan said, which is what? There's no other exceptions to the rule? Of course there are. V'ha'ika merkav, there's something you ride on. So now the Gemara says, Hai merkav hechidami, what is something you ride on? Idi yativ halei, if it's something like an animal and he's sitting on, or a saddle, let's say, it won't be an animal, animals don't become impure, but let's say it's a saddle that he's sitting on. Hainu moshav. That's tamei tuma moshav. That wouldn't be an additional. So what is merkav? Anan hachi kamrina, right? That's we are. Anan hachi kamrina ha'ika gaba de uchva. There's on the saddle. There's usually a type of handle he holds. Now that's helping him to ride, but he's not actually sitting on it. So that would be another exception that's not listed there. That would become tamei tuma merkav from riding. Titania, as it says in the following: Braita ukaf tamei moshav v'tafus tamei merkav. And the tafus is exactly what we're talking about. So what do you see here? You can't learn from general rules. Even when there's exceptions listed, there still can be other exceptions. So Ravina or Rav Nachman said, and they're going to use our Mishnah. And that's how we got here in the first place. What is there? No other exception to the rule? Kmehim and pitriot are mushrooms, fungi that grow in the ground, but they don't get nourishment from the ground. Because of that, they are not included. You can't use them for eruv. So therefore, and therefore they can learn from our case that this is an exception to the rule, and there's more exceptions than said in the Mishnah. Now we're going to move on to maaser. Hakol nikach b'maaser b'kesef maaser. So we discussed in the last shiur that when somebody comes, they take their second maaser, their 10th of their produce, and they redeem it onto a coin. They go to Jerusalem and they're supposed to buy it from there. So now we're going to say, Rabbi Eliezer for Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Chad matnei eruv, Chad matnei maaser. They said the following thing, and one said it had to do with maaser, and one said it had to do with eruv. Chad matnei eruv, and what was this? Lo shanu ela mayim b'fnei atzmo. This was just an intro to what we're about to say. We're going to now have two versions. Lo shanu ela mayim b'fnei atzmo, umelach b'fnei atzmo. When we said except for water and salt, what did we mean? If the water is by itself, or if the salt's by itself, de'ein ma'arvin, then you can't use it for eruv. This is the version that learned it about eruv. Ava mayim b'melach ma'arvin, but if you have water with salt, basically salt water is already considered significant. Why is that? Because people dip their bread in it. V'chad matnei maaser. And one said that this line had to do with maaser. Lo shanu ela mayim b'fnei atzmo, melech b'fnei atzmo. De'ein nikachin. It's only you can't go to Jerusalem and purchase water or salt by themselves. Aval mayim umelach nikchim b'kesef maaser. So now they say, man de matnei maaser. If you say that that's true for maaser, that you can buy salt water, kol sheken eruv. Of course you can use it for eruv. But if you said it about eruv, you wouldn't necessarily say it would be true for maaser. Why is that? My taima pera b'inam, because for maaser you specifically need fruits. Okay, and we're going to learn this out from the pasuk, because the pasuk says, I'll read it inside now. You bring the money to Jerusalem and you buy whatever you want, which is a generalization. We're going to get to at the end of today's daf. We have a klal upratu klal, or riboy miut riboy, which is a generalization, and then specific. Okay, so it says anything you want. Babakal ubatzon, you can buy animals. Bayayin ubeshechar, wine or beer. Ubechol asher tishachal nafshecha, or anything else that you want. And then you eat there before God and you enjoy. So now and you're happy before God. So now we're going to try to figure out what items are included there. So they say here, if you're going to say salt water works for Eruv, you wouldn't necessarily say it works for Maser, because Maser generally, and that's what we're going to say right now, my time of Pera Be'inan, you really need fruits. Okay, we're going to see why they think you need fruits. And there's a machloket about fruits. Fruits seem to include also meat and wine, as we said, and maybe even fish. We're going to see there's a debate about all this, how far we can extend it. Ki ata Rabbi Yitzchak matnei ha'maser. When Rabbi Yitzchak came from Eretz Israel, he taught it about maser specifically. So Meitive, they bring the following contradiction. If you could buy salt water for maser, how could that possibly be? Look at the following source. He'id Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish lefnei Rabbi Eliezer shel Beit Abba. He testified in front of him. Hayu lokchim tzir bekesef maser. They would buy brine, fish brine, with the maser money. Amarlo, shema lo shamata ela keshekirbe dagim uravim behem. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish said, I see that people buy brine. And then Rabbi Eliezer, son of Beit Abba, says, what are you talking about? They only do that when there's fish mixed in with the brine. There has to be actual fish. The brine is no good. Now, if the brine is no good, then obviously salt water is no good. Bafilu Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, and that's what we're going to say right now, even Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, who allowed the brine, lo kamar ela betzir, d'shuman av deperi. It's got liquids from a fruit. Again, we're going to see why fish are considered a fruit, but basically, let's assume right now it's synonymous with fruit for our purposes. That's true. But even with water and salt, absolutely not. So Amar Rav Yosef lo nitzracha ela shenatan l'tochan shemen. It must be where he had oil mixed in with it. Amar le Abaye. Abaye says v'tipukle mishum shemen. So he says, why don't you say then shemen and not salt water? Now, it doesn't make any sense that he means if oil's mixed in. Lo tzricha, what did he want to teach according to Abaye? Shenatan d'mei mayim v'melach behavla'a. What happened? He took the money and he bought this mixture of oil, salt, and water. Now, oil by itself would cost, let's say, 10 shekel. And if you mix salt and water with it, it's now going to cost 12 shekel. So he has his 12 shekel of maser money. He can use it to buy 12 shekels worth of salt, water, oil mixed together, some sort of brine. And that is allowed, even though theoretically the mayim, the water, and the salt shouldn't count. You would think maybe he could only spend 10 shekel. He would have to basically spend the other 2 shekel buying something else. No, this counts. This is what we call havla'ah. It's absorbed. So since he's buying one item and it includes oil in it, we're going to count as if everything he spent was for the proper item, even though salt water he couldn't have bought on his own. That's what it wants to teach us. So now they ask the following question. B'havla mishare, is it really allowed to buy maser with havla'ah? In other words, spend the money? The Gemara says, yes, you can. In other words, you can spend X amount of money on something that's split up into something that would count for maser and something that wouldn't count for maser, and that works. So if you have 100 shekel of maser money, you can spend it all, even though not on an item that includes in it parts that can't really be eaten or can't count as maser eating. So now we're going to say, yes, you in fact can do this. And how do we know this? The Hatanya ben Bagbag Omer, okay, our famous ben Bagbag, right? Those who know the Hadron ben Bagbag bags. He was the famous one who said, "Afochba de kulaba," turn the Torah upside down and all around because everything's in the Torah. Since I like ben Bagbag, I love his name also. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about him. In the Quran, they have a very good footnote about it. His name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Bagbag, but there's actually a debate. He was from the time of the Mishnah. It was in the time of the generation of the destruction of the second temple. Although some people date him earlier to Hillel and Shammai, it's not clear when he lived. We don't have so many statements, but it's clear he was held in widely respected. There's a debate about his name. Okay, I always knew this. Ben Bagbag, Bag, Bet Gimel equals Hey. And some people say he was really Ben Haha. In fact, it comes up in the Gemara somewhere else as a Ben Haha, which like Ben Hay. And he's the same person. And why does he get that? Because it's an allusion. It was a nickname of Avraham, who had the Hay added to his name. He used to be Avram, and then he became called Avraham. And then the second option is to say that it's actually an acronym for the son of a convert, Ben Gael and Ben Gioret, that he was son of converts. And that's why they called him Ben Bagbag, because obviously it's a funny name. And the rabbis say, where would you get this name from? It doesn't sound like a typical name. So there's some interesting information about Ben Bagbag. So now he says, we're going to darshan that pasuk I read you before, the bakar, the cattle, and the tzon, and the bakar, the large animals, the tzon are the sheep and the livestock, and the yayin, wine, and shechal, and the beer. And okay, we're going to darshan this pasuk. Babakal. What do we learn from the word bakal? Right? Why do I have to go into detail about all the different types? Melamed shelokchim bakar al gav oro. You can buy the bakar even with, right, the value of the bakar is based on the value of the animal, the meat, plus the hide. And therefore you can buy it even though you're not going to eat the skin. But tzon, melamed shelokchim tzon al gav gizata. You can buy the tzon even though it has shearings on it that you're not going to eat, but it's included in the purchase of the whole animal. You can spend all your money on that, even though you're not going to be eating that. Ubeyayin, melamed shluchim yayin al gav kankano. When you buy a bottle of wine, part of the price includes the bottle. So you can purchase it, even though you're also getting a bottle for that price. So this all teaches you the havla'ah is allowed for maaser. So that was our proof. Ubeshechar melamed shluchim tamar temed mishechmitz. When you get the wine ready, first it starts soaking. And once it starts to ferment a little bit, you could already purchase this, even though it's not really wine yet. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now Rabbi Yochanan has the following statement. We're going to try to figure this out, why he says this, in the next number of most of the daf. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Man mitargim li babakar, aliba de ben bagbag, bovilna mane abatre lebe masuta. If you can explain to me what the chiddush of the word bakar is, according to, that's why the word bakar was necessary, according to Ben Bagbag's drasha, I will be so happy that I'll go carry, think about Rabbi Yochanan, the big rabbi, I'll go carry your clothes. I'll put your bag on my back and carry them to the bathhouse. Okay, it's just a way of saying I'll be so happy, I'll do anything. My time, what's the reason? Well, kulit tzriche levar mi babakar. All of these words are necessary other than the word bakar. Why? Telo tzarich. My tzriche. So why? My. So tzriche. De'i kata brachmana babakar. If you had just babakar, what might you have thought? We're now going to say why all the other words are necessary. You would have thought bakarhu de mizdabin al gabe oro mishum de gufehu. Right? You would have assumed, well, the bakar, you can't take off the hide of the animal when the animal's still alive. So of course we're going to include the price of the hide in the price of the animal, and that's going to count for you can spend all your master money on it, even though you're not going to eat it. But the shearings are not really part of the body, right? You can easily take them off while the animal's alive. Maybe you would think, so you can't spend the money, right? You can't buy the whole sheep, which includes the price of the shearings when you're not going to even eat the shearings. And that's why it needs tzon. So you would have thought, at least there it's attached. But wine in its bottle, they're not attached. Maybe you would think you can't. Just wine. So wine, it protects it, the bottle. But the temed, once it starts fermenting, it's just a little bit fermented. It's really just water with grapes in it. It doesn't really have much taste. It's not really anything yet. You might have thought not. Okay, and therefore you needed all these things. Okay, and therefore katav rachmana shechar. And katav rachmana b'shechar, if it said b'shechar, havamina, my shechar. Okay, now we're going to do the reverse. Now we're going to go back and say, okay, so we understood you need someone to teach you al gav gizata, even that, and you needed yain to teach you, right, and all of the following. But so now they say, well, let's start from the beginning. Let's start with just shechar. If you had just shechar, havamina, my shechar, dvela ki'ili, deperihu. You might have thought shechar meant just something that's intoxicating, which could be, we've talked about this many times, the pressed figs dish is intoxicating. So you might have thought that that would be, only that would be allowed, but not temed mishech meats. And therefore, aval yayin, sorry, you would have thought that that meant dvela ki'ili, which is fruit. Aval yayin al gav kankano emalo, but you might have thought that wine with its bottle you wouldn't be allowed to. Ve'ikata rachmana yayin al gav kankano, you would have said dahainu nitirute. That's what protects the wine. Aval tzon al gav gizata, where the giza doesn't protect the sheep, so maybe it wouldn't be allowed. Emalo. Therefore, kata rachmana tzon tafilu al gav gizata, even if it's on. Babakar lamali. So now he's going to say, well, that's the whole question. What did we need babakar then for? The chitem, and if you want to say ilo katav rachmana babakal hava mina tzona gavola ina gav gizata lo, that if you had the word bakar, what might you have thought? The tzon with its babakar, you would have thought tzon with, you would have thought that tzon, okay, if you didn't have bakar, you just had tzon, you could have learned tzon with its hide and not necessarily with its giza. And that's why katav rachmana babakar la tuye olo. That's why you need a babakar to teach you la tuye olo, that one's for the hide, and yater leitzon la tuye gizata. Okay, and then you'd have the tzon to teach you. In other words, why do you have both? If you just had tzon, you would have thought that teaches you or. It doesn't teach you giza. It teaches you about the hide, but not the shearing. Once you have bakar and tzon, it teaches you one is about the hide and one is about the shearings. However, so that seems to be an answer. But now they say, Ilo katav rachmana bakar lo hava mina tzona gavola ina gav gizata lo. But no, you actually wouldn't have thought that tzon was the or. You still would have thought that tzon is to teach you about the shearings. Why? Dim kain, because if it was just about the or, they should have said lefta rachmana bakar. Dimimele yater leitzon. You would have just said bakar, because bakar would teach you or, and then we can infer from there if bakar, which the or, which is part of the animal and can't come off, it's going to be included, then you would have learned, right, and then you would have learned for sure also tzon. In other words, also tzon gabeola. In other words, if you had a choice, better to pick bakar, because then it's clear that you're talking about the hide and not the giza, because the bakar doesn't have any shearings. That therefore, so then we're back to square one. Then tzon is really for the giza, and that's obvious. It doesn't teach you or. So, but or would be obvious. If giza is included, then obviously or would be included. In which case, we're back to square one, which is babakar lamali, right? Hashta, so what do you need bakar for? Hashta tzon agav gizatam is dabna bakar agabe alo mebaya, as I said just a minute ago, which is if the shearings are included, then obviously also the hide is included. And that's why and that all comes to explain why Rabbi Yochanan said, if you can explain this to me, I'll be very happy. What's the root of their machloket? Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish for Rabbi Eliezer, V'hainu Tanai de la Kaman, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish for Rabbi Eliezer, Darshe. Okay, what's the sorry, I didn't read it well. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish for Rabbi Eliezer, V'hane Tanai. What's the debate between them and the other Tanaim? Okay, we're going to see that there's a machloket. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish said, remember he said, Lochim Tzir. And then Rabbi Eliezer said, Rabbi Eliezer then said only when there's fish mixed in. Okay, so now we want to know, and there's other people who disagree with them who say, okay, we're going to learn what exactly the debate between them and the others are. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish for Rabbi Eliezer, V'hane Tanai de la Kaman. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish for Rabbi Eliezer, Darshe, Riboy, Umiute. They learn what we call a Riboy and Miute. Okay, there's basically, Riboy is to include a lot and then exclude. And then we're going to see Riboy, Miut, V'Riboy. And then there's Klal, Upratu, Klal. These are two different methodologies that are used. Generally, the Klal, Upratu, Klal is more limiting, and Riboy, Miut, Riboy is more inclusive. Okay, they both include because they both start and end with generalizations, but the type of drasha of Riboy, Miut includes more than the other. So how does this work? So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish for Rabbi Eliezer Darshe Riboy Miute. How does it go? Anything you want to buy, you can. That's riba. That's a generalization or an inclusive statement. It becomes more specific. Anything else you want, chazar v'riba, riba umi'et, v'riba, okay, chazar v'riba, it reinterpreted, right? It re-included, became inclusive again. So riba mi'et v'riba, when you have that kind of a structure, what does it mean? These are all ways that we learn the Torah, we darshan. Riba hakol. Once you do that, you include everything basically. meaning it's a very inclusive. That's why it ends with inclusive. So then, my Rabbi, well, Rabbi Komile. Well, okay, so we include, you can eat anything, but since there is some sort of detail in there, it has to limit something. It's just going to be less limited. My Mi-8, well, Le Rabbi Eliezer Mi-8 seal. Okay, we're now going to have two tracks. According to Rabbi Eliezer, not brine, without the fish. The Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish Mi-8 Mayim v'melach. According to him, only water and salt are out of the picture. The Hanei Tanai, but now the other Tanaim who disagree, we'll see in a minute what they say, Klalu Prate, Klale Prate. That they learned through the Klalu Prat system. Titania. One is, by the way, attributed to Rabbi Akiva, and one is attributed to Rabbi Shmuel, these methodologies. It was like different school of thought about how to darshan the psukim. Titania. Here's the Braita. V'natata keseh b'chol asher taveh nafshecha klal. Generalization. Babakar b'tzon b'yayin b'shechar prat. Specific. When you have a klalu pratu klal, when you have this kind of structure, it's only things that are like the details. So how so? Just like the prat, the details. What's similar? What's the common denominator between all four things mentioned? They are fruits out of fruits, meaning either they're animals that grow from other animals or fruits that grow from the ground, or gidule karka, right? They grow from the ground or they get nourishment from the ground. Avkol primi pri v'gidule karka. So therefore, it has to be something that's primi pri or gidule karka. That would include fish, by the way. V'tanya idach ma prat meforash vlad vladot haaretz avkol vlad vladot haaretz, which is now going to say we're going to exclude fish. Okay, until now we saw Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer thought fish was okay. Now we're going to say this opinion excludes fish. Because vlad v'ladot haaretz, we'll see, my benai, what's the difference? Vlad v'ladot haaretz means it grows from the ground, okay? Meaning its growth is dependent on the ground. Actually, no, I think I explained it wrong. We'll get back to it. There's gidule karke, grows from the ground, versus vlad v'ladot haaretz. It's the reverse of what I just said, so correct myself. My benai amar abai dagim ika benai. It's fish that are the difference between these two opinions. Lamanda amar primi pri v'gidule karka, hani dagim gidule karka ninu. The fish do grow from the ground. Okay, maybe I did say it right. Sorry, I'm confusing everyone. Dagim are gidule karka. They grow from the ground. They don't really grow from the ground, but they do get nourishment from things that are in the ground. Okay, the ground under the water even. Lemanda amar vlav vladot haaretz dagim mimai ivru, right? Mimai ivru. Dagim grow from the water. In other words, they're born in the water. They're not something that grow out of the ground. So because of that, the fish would be excluded. So according to this opinion, the reason why they exclude fish is because they darshan klalu pratu klal, according to one of the ways of using klalu pratu klal, excludes fish, versus Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer, who use riboy mi'ut v'riboy. Okay, that's it for today, and Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov.